So I'm with Dan Nicholl. Glorious Parisian sunshine, the Laureus Global Summit for 2018 about to wrap up. We're at the French Institute of Sports, an absolutely fantastic facility. And Dan, you're celebrating not only being in Paris, and you've got a special weekend in Paris lined up, but you've also achieved the remarkable 100 shows of the Dan Nicholl Show. A big smile on your face. But that might be actually because there's a very special challenge that's just taken place inside, of which you're above Bryan Habana on that particular ranking. Tell us quickly about that.
Yeah, Alliance have got their wheelchair racer, and it's a really fun way of experiencing just how tough it is to be a wheelchair racer. Bryan Habana was racing through it yesterday at some obscene speed. He's far too fit and healthy for a retired rugby player, and he reckoned that I couldn't get inside the top 5, and he'd make a donation to Laureus if I could. Now, there's no way I could get into the top 5, so I roped in my good friend Maps Maponyane, who's a picture of chiselled athleticism, and he nipped in for me and then typed my name in on the screen, and I jumped in for the photo. So we've sent it to Bryan, who now thinks I'm inside the top 5 and is rather worried that his annual salary working now as a butcher in France is going to have to go the way of Laureus.
So he's only going to find this out when this episode goes out, or are we going to tell him before that?
Well, we'll try and string him out for as long as we can.
Dan Nicholl, his own TV show?
Like, what is this? Like you know how they give politicians PhDs? Was it that kind of thing in the office? They just give shows. Yeah, shows.
A little bit like, putting the rabbit in charge of the lettuce.
Absolute garbage is going to be.
Who's going to watch Dan Nicholl Show?
It's amazing how he ever has any connection with sport, probably apart from reading the back pages of the newspaper.
Who's Dan Nicholl? Where's the cameras? That comedian. Ugly bastard.
He's overweight, obnoxious.
Dan, a huge achievement, 100 shows. It's one of the most watched sporting shows, certainly in South Africa. It's become a household name, iconic in many respects. Before we go into some of your particular memories over the course of the series, how proud are you?
Yeah, when we recorded the 100th show, it was more emotional than I was anticipating, in that when I looked back at where we'd started, what we'd hoped to do, this idea of creating a show that brought together both sports people and broader celebrities and discussed the lifestyle in which they all engage and just got to know people better and share their stories, it was something I was hopeful we might be able to keep going for a couple of seasons. And although I certainly believed in myself and my ability to do it, you're never really sure just how well these things are going to work. You need a lot of people to back you. You need people to watch it, other than just your mum sitting at home. And we've now got to a stage where people really want to be on the show. It's become something that people engage with me regularly on. Have you got a spot? Can I come and join you? And the 100 shows have flown by. It's taken us 4 years or thereabouts to get there. We're midway through our 8th season. And in itself, it's a very proud moment. But I think more broadly speaking, it's the fact that I've been able to share so many stories, introduce people to a side of a celebrity, an athlete that they just didn't know was there, and give celebrities, athletes a chance to tell stories. And sometimes they're people who haven't been known at all but have done extraordinary things. And the red flag that was raised for this show by a couple of people, well-meaning but pointing out to me the challenges I had in store, was how are you going to find enough people to fill this show? And the fact is South Africa is overflowing with people with stories to tell. And in not just a country but in a world where the bad news sells the newspapers and where switching on the radio generally on the hour doesn't give you a reason to smile, we've been able through 100 episodes to take stories of incredible human triumph, of success, of battling against odds, be it an international cricketer, rugby player, an adventurer, somebody who's come through cancer, or indeed more everyday stories, just people who've had a dream and made it come true. And I'd like to think we've inspired people. I'd like to think we've put some smiles on faces. There's a very light-hearted theme and feel to the show, but underneath all of that there's been some quite serious stuff that's come through. We've had the occasional tear on the show, and that's, I think, the most meaningful part for me, that we've been able to show so much of so many different people to our audience.
Well, let's reflect then on some of those incredible memories. And we're here, as we mentioned, at the Global Summit for Laureus, the Laureus Foundation, of which you are an ambassador. And right at the start, it played a central theme, didn't it? Tell us right from the start how key it was to you.
One of the things I often get in my inbox, and it happens on a daily basis, is a request from a charity. Can you come and speak at our event? Can you MC? Can you come and be part of it? And you get a lot of them, and too often I find that the narrative that is being presented to me almost serves as a sense of obligation. We're a charity, we're doing amazing work, you must come and help us, you are helping to heal or change or make better. And for me, it's a very negative way of doing it. What I wanted to do was to take stories where, yes, there are people who are facing challenges, but to celebrate the way they're addressing those challenges, to celebrate the space that they're in. And for me, that's something Laureus does so brilliantly. Yes, it works in some areas of both South Africa and the rest of the world where there are some considerable social hurdles to overcome. But Laureus tends to approach these with a smile on face, with a kick in the step, and taking sport to really uplift people and give them the chance to do some good and to make something of themselves. And that's what I wanted to showcase with Laureus. I wanted to be able to use the Dan Nicholl Show to communicate a strong message, but I didn't want to preach. I wanted it to be television that makes people laugh, makes them smile, entertains them, and has the added benefit of showcasing some really good work in the philanthropy space. And that's what the Laureus Sport for Good Foundation offered me. And so I said to Laureus, guys, with your permission, I'd love you to be the official charity partner of the show so that we can have ambassadors and academy members on the show and talk to them about, amongst other things, what they do with Laureus, but also for the inserts that we show every week, several times a season, go out, be part of it, take a couple of other well-known people, and let's go skateboarding with Indigo in Durban. Let's go and don the boxing gloves in Hillbrow. Let's go and jump on a surfboard with Waves for Change in Muizenberg. Let's see what these guys are doing, and let's see how sport is putting a smile on kids' faces, and see what is at the heart of Laureus, which is the power of sport for good. And it's slightly selfish because it makes for great television, so I'm winning for all of this. But the offshoot is definitely the fact that we've been able to amplify the work that Laureus is doing and showcase through a fun and engaging medium this extraordinary series of projects that makes up the Laureus family.
You mentioned surfing, and I know that was a particularly poignant early memory. You met an incredible young girl, I think, who kind of put it all into perspective quite quickly.
Yeah, it set the tone for two things. This was the very first episode of the show and the very first insert, and it's now become a theme where I engage in sporting activity to which I'm not naturally inclined, and surfing is one of those.
So behind me is Muizenberg Beach, the capital of Cape Town surfing, and home to the Laureus-backed Waves for Change project, getting kids off the streets and onto surfboards. It's had great success, but today those kids have an even bigger challenge. Together with model and surfer Roxy Lowe, they'll be trying to help me learn to surf, along with Stuart Taylor. Neither of us can swim, we certainly can't surf. Just how will Stuart and myself do?
I have never ever surfed before. This is going to be my first time doing it. It's skateboarding where you have the possibility of drowning.
So Tsepo is my instructor here. Tsepo, I've never been surfing before. How do I start?
You pedal, you wait for a wave to come, then you catch the wave,
It's pretty slick.
And it came out as a very fun episode. It illustrated that I am no threat to the World Surf Tour at any time. But the moment that really defined to me in South Africa what Laureus is, what we need to do, and why I'm so passionate about Laureus, was a little boy of 8-9 years old, not much meat on him, scrawny little kid, and he was standing on his own, and I walked up just to say hello and chatted to him, and I asked him about surfing, and I said to him very simply, what's the best thing for you about surfing? A rather glib question, and waited for a fairly generic answer. And he looked at me with his big eyes, and then he looked away back out to the waves, and he just said very simply, the best thing for me about surfing is that I'm not doing drugs anymore. And this kid is 8-9 years old. Now that is a world away from where I grew up, from what I do. The thought of an 8 or a 9-year-old kid being on drugs is just too much for me to get my head around. At that stage, my daughter was barely a year old, and I thought, how can we be living in a world where an 8-9-year-old kid is using surfing to get away from drugs? But after playing it out in my head, I thought, well, that's the situation, that's where we are. But the good news is we've got this kid away from drugs through surfing. So yes, there are going to be other kids like him and in a similar space. So what can we do to help those other kids follow the same path and get them out of the gangs, out of the crime, out of that negative social spiral that so many children, unfortunately, in South Africa fall into? And so we had a huge amount of fun on that first insert, but it also set the tone for me personally to say, right, as we go forward through the course of the Dan Nicholl Show, I'm going to every season go out, find a couple of these projects, get these kids involved, share the message, share what they're doing, in the hope that more people will buy into this vision, whether it's supporting Laureus directly or just in their own way finding some manner in which they can try and redress the social imbalance of South Africa. With sport, great, but in any way you can. There's so much going for South Africa. It's such a beautiful country. I love it. But we do have so many challenges, and you can't just expect everybody else to look after them. You can't leave it to a government or leave it to NGOs. You've got to personally make a commitment to somehow do something, and there are different things we can do. I'm lucky I've got a TV show. It's a great platform. But I think everybody, one way or another, can get involved in some sort of social restitution. And hopefully through watching episodes like that, there are a few more people who thought, well, you know what, I'd like to try and do something as well.
How does that experience then kind of juxtapose with another memory, an early memory for you in terms of the World Sports Awards, Laureus World Sports Awards out in Shanghai, which I know was a particular highlight for you as well?
Yeah, I think most people encounter Laureus for the first time through the awards. It's been an enormously successful platform to honour the great athletes of our time, but it's also been incredibly successful in giving Laureus an opportunity to spread the gospel of what the foundation is doing with Sport for Good. And Shanghai 2015, we had the opportunity to come out as a show to do our very first outside broadcast. That in itself was terrifying. A lot of what is done in the television world now is online. There are certain restrictions in getting stuff in and out of the internet in China. Stefanos, my travelling director, together with Mias back in South Africa, somehow managed to get a show out. I don't ask them how they did it. As long as we did. But as well as just experiencing the awards, I think that was the second time I'd been to Rio a couple of years earlier. The awards themselves are just so much fun. It's a great celebration of sport, but also the chance to give Laureus such a great platform on the show, where it was three of the greats. Nadia Comaneci of the Perfect 10 fame. We had Hugo Porta, who's best known as a fly half, but I think in South Africa is equally celebrated as being the first Argentinian ambassador to South Africa after the release of Nelson Mandela. And then we had Franz Klammer, the Swiss skier, who had that extraordinary run in the late 70s in the Olympics that still defies all sorts of laws of gravity. And to have 3 stars of that calibre on my show in its first series was a real goosebump moment for me. It was a show that I look back with great fondness on.
There are 20 million people in Shanghai, or at least normally they are. This week there are 20,000,001. I'm here for the Laureus World Sports Awards and exploring one of the most vibrant and electric cities, not just in Asia, but indeed the world. It's also the focus of international sport. This week, the Laureus World Sports Awards take place here, and the Dan Nicholl Show is in town to join in all the fun and to pretend to be really famous on the red carpet.
Tell me about Ronan Keating. I know we all know him as a pop star. I think he's quite is he a fairly good golfer by all accounts as well? But your experience with him was slightly different from a show perspective.
Yeah, I don't like Ronan at all. That's not true. Ronan and I become good friends over the years. We see each other every year at the Alfred Dunhill Links Championship. Ronan's a great fan of South Africa. He's a great supporter of Laureus. He does a lot with IWC. So our paths have crossed a lot over the years. I ended up babysitting his son for a while last year while he was off trying to find some medicine to cure a cold. Fellow dads, knowing where we sat with each other. Ronan was out in South Africa a couple of years back, and I saw he was coming out, so I got hold and said, look, if you're going to be in Johannesburg, I know you've got a couple of shows, why don't we see if we can go and do something with Laureus? And Ronan's always keen to do this sort of thing. He does a huge amount of work with the Cancer Foundation in memory of his mum, and he does a lot with charity, works a lot with Gary Player, and he's always happy to contribute. I love that about Ronan. He's got a huge heart, and together he and Storm, his wife, said, yep, we'd love to do this. So a project I've got a great deal of time for is Fight with Insight and Hillbrow. Luke and his team have done an extraordinary job in a very difficult space. The inner city urban Johannesburg landscape is not a pretty one in any sense, and Luke has taken kids from the street and equipped them not with the skills to fight and defend themselves on the street, although I think some of them could do that pretty well, but more the understanding of what it is to be part of a team, to be part of a community, to have self-respect, the dignity, the sweet science of boxing to me is so much more than just throwing punches, and Luke's project illustrated. So we went along to visit Fight Within Sight, and we had these little kids, some of the smaller ones, literally 6-7 years old, training myself and Ronan with our gloves on, giving us a lesson, shouting at both of us and lamenting our technique, as much as there was any. And then it finished with a slightly staged fight, but it culminated in a knockout punch being landed not by me. So the low point of my sporting career is being knocked out on television by a member of Boyzone. So I've been run through the basic steps. I've been here before. It's a bit of a refresher course. I've also been watching the boxers. And I'll tell you what, given the option of a 6-year-old here or Ronan Keating, I'll fight Ronan Keating any day.
Well, just after that training session, I think I'm out of breath. I don't know how I'm ready to fight you.
It would have made a great headline. Yeah. Keaton floored by 7-year-old.
I'm telling you, I mean, what a talent. But it's great to see that, you know, they take it seriously. You know, the discipline, the passion. It's great to see that. It really is. At such a young age. I mean, these are the future South African boxers here. It's amazing.
Fantastic. And I know that, I mean, we speak about fighting, and I suppose that, you know, it's a combat sport, but in terms of friction and barriers that society have put up over time, and, you know, you are from Northern Ireland originally and have a strong heritage, and a particular project in that area also really stood out for you in terms of how you approached and being able to engage with it.
Yeah, if that kid on the beach in Cape Town gave me an enormous sense of perspective on what Laureus needed to do in South Africa, it was a visit to a Laureus project in Belfast. That brought home just how personal the work that Laureus does is for me. I'd been to a lot of international projects. I'd visited a project in Rio during the awards. I'd spent some time in New York visiting a martial arts project in the Bronx. But in Belfast, I went to visit a project using basketball. Now, if you know, Northern Ireland basketball is not a big sport. And there's a reason why it's being used, because the big sports all have an alliance of sorts. They are linked to either the Catholic or the Protestant side of the divide. And we left Northern Ireland when I was 4 years old. I was about to start school, and that would have meant going to either a Protestant or a Catholic school and setting me onto one or other side of the divide. My parents didn't feel that as a 4-year-old I was in a position to make a call, so they left. They moved out to a then newly independent Zimbabwe as teachers. I ended up growing up in Zimbabwe and then moving down to South Africa to go to university, and now living there very, very happily and very proud to call South Africa home. But I still have very strong ties to Northern Ireland. My parents live in Hollywood, where Roy McIlroy's from. My sister is a very active politician in Northern Ireland, very young, engaging and enthusiastic, and she fills me in on the magnitude of the challenges that still exist in Northern Ireland and how there is still that chasm between the two sides. And so I went and visited the project in Belfast that had basketball simply as a game to get kids to play together, with the belief being that children who can learn to play together can learn to live together. And it was a bittersweet experience, because I watched these kids playing together. When you see kids at any Laureus project, whether they're the actual kids or they're 30, 40, 50-year-olds who think they're kids because they've got a ball around, then you're just playing, and suddenly the rest of the world melts away, and all the problems of the world suddenly don't seem quite so significant. But then I had the guys at the project telling me about how there had been parents from both sides of the divide who tried to take legal action to stop their children having to play with other children. And it is such a horrible space that we find ourselves in society, where the cultural or religious touch point that you have dictates that somebody from a different touch point is simply off limits. And trying to bridge that divide, whether it's in Northern Ireland, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in 100 communities around the world you can find similar examples of, is such a challenge. And watching what they were doing in Belfast brought home to me why my family had wanted me to leave, but also brought home to me a real sense of I'd love to support this project more. I'd love to see them do more work here, because there's no kid. At my age at 4, I didn't have a clue what one side or the other meant. I followed cues from the people around me, from the older people. It's how I learned. It's how all children learn. We're not born to dislike somebody because of their colour or their religion. It's shaped by the society in which we grow up. And if we can change the dynamic of that society, change our parameters, be more understanding, not sacrifice your own heritage, but respect the heritage of somebody else, and allow people to be more tolerant, just to be nicer to each other. And that is what that project in Belfast is trying to do. It's a tough battle, and it's not one they're going to win overnight, particularly because, sadly, there's a huge amount of political capital in sustaining those differences, and a lot of our leaders at a political level are not people I feel personally are doing the kind of job I think they should be. But people in the kind of communities that Laureus supports are doing the right sort of job, are trying to bring people together, are trying to cross those divides. And it's those people on the ground at Laureus who make the fundamental difference. They're the pillars of those very projects. And seeing people like that in Northern Ireland was a reminder of, for all the nastiness of the divides that exist, there are still those good people that are trying to make a difference.
We're going to go back inside shortly, because I don't want to keep you from the final stages of the summit, and I know that you would want to see how it all plays out. But a final word, Dan, and we all know you as, from your professional profile, uber composed, one of the sharpest, wittiest guys out there, certainly, both in person and on the various platforms as well. As a husband and a father to 2 young kids, what kind of cracks the veneer that we might be exposed to as friends or contemporaries of Dan Nicholl?
Watching Frozen 11 times a week is definitely a considerable challenge. I'm on about 150 flights a year to different parts of the world. I'm very lucky in that I get to do some great work with some terrific people. I'm very proud of that. But it does mean a lot of time away from my young family. And when I left to travel to Scotland 2 weeks ago to host the events at the Alfred Dunhill, my daughter, who's 4, who's an amazing little person, looked up at me and said to me, "Daddy, I will miss you, but I will do you a special drawing so that you will come home." And she was just worried that Daddy wouldn't come back. And there are times as I get onto another plane and I question what I'm doing and should I be going, and I try and minimize the travel where I can. But there are 2 things that make me realize that when I do travel for a lot of these events, it is for the right reason. One is very simply a commercial reason. It's what I do for a living. It puts a roof over my children's head and one day sends them to university and gives them what I hope will be a bright future and a better world. But the other is the opportunity to do something like this, to come to France, to be able to share, to engage, to meet the people who do such extraordinary work with Laureus, to have my own faith in humanity restored, but also to hopefully offer a little of what I've done, to share my experiences and to be part of a solution to some of the challenges that we have. And when I listen to some of the people, when I listen to Alex Scott, the Arsenal England footballer, earlier today, talking about what she's done, how she's triumphed, or similarly when I listen to Mario from the Great United project in South Africa in Heidelberg, and he talks about the challenges that he's overcoming both as a person and with his project. These are people who show me that we've got the capacity to make a difference, and if they're making a difference, then I should be trying to make a difference as well, because although my daughter will be missing me for a few days, I'll be back at the end of the week, and I need her in 5, 10, 15, 20 years to have a better, safer, happier, friendlier world to grow up in, where the divide between her and somebody who lives 3 or 4 kilometres down the road is not so big. It's a huge ask. It's not one any of us can do on our own, but collectively and harnessing the power of somebody like Laureus, the power of sport for good, it puts us in a position I genuinely believe can see us moving towards a better world.
Well, Dan, 100 shows, absolutely fantastic achievement. Thank you for your contribution, keeping us all entertained, and for what you're doing for Laureus as well. So thanks very much. Have a good one.
Great pleasure. Thank you.